with a longer and longer period. And a storm wave that we get when the wind's blowing here at the coast might only have a period of 8 seconds. So every 8 seconds a wave passes by a fixed point. Well, that wave doesn't have a lot of energy in it. It just started blowing, like Owen started blowing on that over on our tabletop there. But if we're blowing over a long period, a long piece of ocean, more and more energy is being conferred into it, and the period stretches out. And when the period gets to be 17 seconds or 20 seconds, meaning the wave from peak to peak takes 20 seconds to pass by a fixed point, there's a lot of energy in that wave, a tremendous amount of energy in that wave as compared to a 10-second period wave. And if I take you back to your high school calculus, integration will give you the area under that curve, and that's a measure of the energy in that wave. So a little peaky wave that's maybe 8 or 10 feet tall doesn't have a lot of area under it, whereas a wave with a very long period, like a 20-second period wave, has an enormous amount of energy in that wave. And in fact, most of that wave's energy is below the surface of the ocean. And then we get into what happens when that wave begins to hit our coast. Yeah, so there's a lot on this slide, but I think really interesting things to see here is that we're talking about 40-knot sustained winds over this whole chart. And if it's just blowing for a short period of time, you might end up with or a short area, you might end up with a 7-second period storm wave. Real peaky, but doesn't go real deep. Now, as the winds continue to blow and we get our bigger period waves, a tremendous amount of this energy is actually below the surface of the ocean. This says 2,000 miles. This is if 40-knot winds are blowing over a 2,000-mile fetch, and then we're going to end up with a 20-second period wave. And interestingly, this wave is feeling the bottom at 1,000 feet deep. 1,000 feet deep. It's really hard to wrap your head around. And that's important because when waves hit our coast, when they begin to hit the continental shelf and it gets below 1,000 feet or below 725 feet or below 575 feet, the bottom, the bathymetry of the earth there begins to affect the wave. Waves are pulled towards shallow water. And so this can take a wave that was developed in the North Pacific, and it can cause it to wrap into a place in Santa Cruz, which faces south, because it begins to refract off of the shallow water in Santa Cruz, and it's pulled in and will break in a very nice wave down at Steamer Lane, for example, down in Santa Cruz. And the wave will lose some of its energy. There will be some decay as some of that energy passes it, but because it feels the bottom at these really deep depths, the wave is attracted and pulled toward where the ocean floor is shallower. And so they're going to get waves there, even though the wind wasn't blowing from the south, it was blowing from the north. The other interesting thing when you do your calculus, and I've taken some of the equations and stuff out of here. I thought we were going to have more kids in our crowd. Well, they'd probably understand better than most of you guys anyway. But the bigger the period in the wave, when you go back to your calculus, the faster the wave is moving. And that makes for really interesting things when the waves hit our shore as well. So we have the storms out there. We know how long the wind's been blowing. We know over what the area is it's been blowing over. We know the direction that the wind's been blowing in. And we see all that in forecasts. But then, as surfers, we wait for the waves to show up at the buoys. These buoys are out in the ocean, and they're not out in the open ocean where it's thousands and thousands of feet deep, but we have a buoy that's 1,000 miles off our coast here, another one 500 miles off our coast, and it picks up all different wave heights, swell heights, wind direction, water temperature, all kinds of good information. And we get that information here. So when we know what the period is of the waves that are hitting, we see the size that are hitting 1,000 miles off the coast, we can then take that information, realize that there's going to be decay along the way as we move over shallower waters, realize that the actual direction that the swell is coming in is going to matter to our local conditions, and we can figure out when the waves are going to show up. because we know how fast they're moving based on their period, we know the direction they're coming from, and we know when they'll get here, and we know what size they'll be. It's still an art, but there's an awful lot of science in it as well. I just threw this slide in here to show you some of the effects of refraction, I guess. So when we have our big storms form, they form, way out here, and they blow wind towards us, and we never need to get the storm here. The storm, we'd be happy if it went in Seattle or, up in Canada or something like that. We just need it to have wind blowing in our direction from a long way away. So Mavericks is right down here. And the waves break much bigger there than anywhere along this coast. And why is that? This coast, relative to a storm 1,000 miles away, with winds blowing over 2,000 miles of ocean, how can 40 miles make a difference in what size the wave is going to be? Well, the easy answer, or one of the easy answers, is that some of these beaches face south, and so the wave actually has to come down and wrap in here. So when we have downtown Half Moon Bay, it would have to wrap in to get in here, so the wave is going to be smaller. But the wave that hits right here, right next to Mavericks, can be half or 1/3 of the size. We might have a 30, 40, 50-foot face wave breaking right here, and literally 250 yards away or less, we have just a 20-foot wave or a 15-foot wave breaking there. And so why is that? There's more to it than just the direction that the wave is coming in. So this shows something that's really important for Mavericks as opposed to a lot of other places. Mavericks is a really special place. And it's this idea of convergence. There's a whole lot of different factors that come into creating waves, but we're getting giant waves here and just, average size waves here and tiny waves here. And this is all within like a half-mile area. Well, it's this idea of convergence, and it has to do with this idea of refraction. If you can kind of see the ridge lines here, it shows where it's shallower and when it's deeper. So smooth is deeper, and here is where you have more definition, it's shallower. So a Mavericks wave comes right in here, and what happens when you have wave energy that comes through deeper water, it doesn't have as much friction on the floor of the ocean, so it continues to move faster. So it's deep on both sides of this Mavericks reef here, so the water here starts moving much faster than the water here, which slows down as it hits this shallower reef here. And then it goes from pretty deep to really shallow here, so this jumps up to be this Mavericks wave. At the same time, the wave is kind of wrapping around and multiplying the energy because it's in these deep water channels here. When it hits this reef, it pops up and it just explodes just enormously over at Mavericks. It's one of the special places in the world where big waves break, and it has to do with the bathymetry, or the underwater geography of the ocean floor there. So this is what the underwater geography looks like at Mavericks, and there's this question, can a 100-foot wave actually break at Mavericks? And this is just what I want to close at. Well, I looked at this 15 years ago when I started surfing Mavericks. I got a map of the bathymetry. I'd been out here this is the harbor here, so I'd been out here for mariners who needed to make their way out in the deeper water. Guys go out and fish even in these crazy, crazy swells. And so I looked at the bathymetry. So Mavericks here jumps up on a normal day and breaks like right in here, where the water goes from like 50 feet deep, 70, 55, 49 feet deep, suddenly goes to 22 feet and then 16 feet deep. Boom, explosion. Well, what we need for a 100-foot wave to break is we need essentially about 100 feet of water and then have all this energy directed towards it, so that's going to happen. And if you kind of carefully look at the underwater depths here, you can see that the swell is coming in from here, and it starts to trip on water that's less than 100 feet deep right in here. And since we have over here, we continue to have over 100-foot depths, it's technically possible for a 100-foot wave to break at Mavericks and actually peel and be surfable. And that is something that I think will happen someday. It is crazy. It won't be me. And it won't be my kids. But I think that it will be surfed someday at Mavericks way out here. Did I have a question out there?
challenging.
Yeah.
He's challenging it. Oh, Paco's going. Yeah, we'll bring you out, Paco. We'll drag you into one. And so that's a little bit about waves and where they come from and how we figure out where we're going to surf. There's a lot more to it, but that's the basics. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.